So before we start with the next panel, we would like to share with you the results of our collective mood check. So if we could please see them on screen. So as we can see here, 44% checked happy, 18% checked stressed, 13% overwhelmed, and 25% excited. And maybe this will be food for thought for our next speaker. So the rise in mental health challenges is pushing us to find new ways to help and to develop fresh approaches and alternatives for treatment. That's why our next speaker, Professor Fiorenzo Omenetto, is here. He has a cutting-edge idea he'd like to share with us, so let's please welcome him on stage.
Thank you very much. Welcome. So I'm going to be a little bit provocative here because you've heard a lot of things about the importance of agency, of personalization, AI, etc. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit of what could happen if you had different types of information. And I come from the lab that I direct is a lab that is a biomaterials laboratory. We care about the materials that come from nature, and we reimagine these materials for use in advanced technology, material science, global health, etc. And that's not the point of my talk. You've just seen that we are in a connected world. We are full of wearable devices. This is not a wearable device, but that sense your body's health. But what about wearables that actually respond to your mind? And so this is the provocation. What if you could have a shirt that senses stress? What if you could have a skin patch for anxiety? What if you had, a band that foresees a panic attack? What if you had a headband that read depression? What if you had something that helped nonverbal people communicate? And so you had a garment that added this dimension. So what would you do with that, and is it useful, and does it give you something else? So our goal really is to advance these types of scenarios and try to think of how technology can affect variables that are very, very hard to detect today. Simple, practical, personal. These sensors don't exist today, and the goal really is to get these sensors into the hands of everybody and to give everybody agency, to bring personalization to these devices. So what does that have to do with Silklab and materials? So one humbling thing from nature is nature has a lot of solutions for materials. This is really our playground of the materials that nature uses to build. The lab is called Silklab. What is surprising about silk, and why am I telling you about silk? We don't use silk as a textile. We don't use silk as a textile at all. We break it down, we break fabric down, and we turn it into a liquid. And then we use the liquid as our starting material. So we use the liquid to put the proteins that the worm uses to make the fiber that you see here. We use this liquid to put silk back together and build things, build silk things, build many things. And so why do we do this? What is surprising about using this material? It's water-based, it's sustainable, it's edible, it's implantable without causing inflammatory responses, it's resorbable, you can program its degradation, and it's bioactive without refrigeration. What does that mean? You literally imagine this liquid, it's water and a protein, so water and a Lego brick of protein, and then you add biology and you form materials, so you build things with it. And the biology is stable, and that allows you to do a lot of things that are very relevant to what I'm about to tell you. So this is what is, there's a lot of stories around here. This is the stuff that we build that I'm not going to talk about today. But it's at many, many scales. There are the really, really tiny things like nanoparticles, and then the really, really big things like this is Laia, and this is something that is printed out of silk. So there's a lot of stuff I can tell you. Then if you are interested in any of these boxes, I'm here. I'm happy to tell you stories about them. But what does that have to do with your mind? So the biological preservation means that we can take this liquid and turn it into an ink that you can print in an inkjet printer, an ordinary inkjet printer. You can screen print it, you can do whatever. So this is one of the examples where you take something from nature, so an antibody, and you can stabilize the antibody inside the ink. So your inkjet printer now prints a biological reporter. So if you print it on a lab glove like this, if you print the word contaminated on the lab glove, then, and you touch a surface that is contaminated with bacteria, that word turns from blue to red. So that's nice, maybe. And one thing that connects us to here is that now you can make these things of arbitrary dimension. This was done pre-COVID in 2019. These are tapestries that are all sensitive and responsive, and that were hung right across the square right there. And the things that you can do is you can start doing these types of shirts, very, very simple shirts that detect changes of temperature and changes of pH. But there are so many glands in your body that you're painting a picture of yourself, you're painting your picture of your reaction, and you're painting something that you can pick up with all the phones that are in this room. And if I pick the colors right, your phone is going to be able to tell you how much lactate there is in your sweat, how much have you exercised, and so on and so forth. So, this gets very, very intricate because you can choose the colors and you can choose the variables and you can make like these very psychedelic shirts that maybe belong more on the dance floor than in a medical diagnostic. And so these are the little patches, if you remember, so I'm old, if you remember the game Mastermind, you're playing Mastermind with biological colors. So they're patches that are readable by your phone, etc. Wow. We like this work, but how do you go from wow to something that is meaningful, right? Because a lot of the things that happen in a laboratory in a university are not necessarily the technology that you're going to use tomorrow. So we're very interested in these things. Technically speaking, you need to be sensitive and you need to be specific. You have to have the right molecules that you put inside these things, otherwise they're useless. I can claim to first order that glove that I showed you before is useful only in very, very specific scenarios. And so this is where we work with the University of Washington with David Baker, Institute of Protein Design, that designs proteins that don't exist in nature. And then we take these proteins, and these proteins are designed to respond to a very specific virus, toxin, or whatever. And we mix them with silk. We use the stabilizing properties of our liquid silk, and we make chemically responsive materials. So we go through this chain. We basically are making a cocktail of silk plus molecule. Then we end up in formats that are very interesting. So we've demonstrated that we can sense COVID, like the test that you take at home, by printing these inks onto the surface of a mask or on the gloves, that we can sense botulin, we can sense hepatitis B, etc. The thing that I think is very important is that you can start doing unusual things like this. Your sensors become very, very bizarre. So you buy a drone and you make a sponge that now you can fly around this room for half an hour, you land it, and then you analyze the drone because that protein is in the body of the drone, and you can figure out whether COVID is in the air. Wow. Well, so what does that have to do with mental health? Hormones are important. So among these proteins that we were able to sense human estrogen receptor 2, which is one of the 3 hormones that are responsible for breast cancer. So the thing that is very interesting here is that now you can imagine a sensing bra that gives you an early warning sign of breast cancer through and eliminates, for example, nipple biopsies. Clinical testing, long way to go, again, from wow to action. On the mental health side, if you can sense sensors and if you can build these proteins, now you have access to a set of variables in a lot of the biofluids, so sweat, saliva, blood, and urine. You have access to variables that are not monitored, physiologically impaired to, for example, your web search activity, the physiological measurements that come from your Apple Watch and so forth. So having these types of powers in your inks and in your inkjet printer opens up a chapter that I think is very exciting, and then might give more personalization, more agency to the individual to start on their own before overcoming that barrier and starting to talk about these things. And it's going to take a village. This is not a simple thing to do. You've heard about everything, including ethical issues, including adoption, including who owns the data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So bringing these things back to the individual is something that is very important to us, but these are our people. So there's people that have scaled up Silk for us so that we use Silk to cover food and preserve food in stores. And again, if you want to know about it, we'll talk about it later. But we shape these molecules into multiple forms, as I've shown you. We work alongside experts of depression clinical and research programs that have multiple clinics, from depression clinics, suicide clinics, ketamine clinics, postpartum depression clinics, et cetera, which is a very important link to make. And then we work with the people that design the proteins and scale them up. And we need this room. We need people. And because the village does need to grow. And we need to do this in a mindful, ethical, and meaningful way, as I'm sure you've heard many times before. With that, I thank you. And I want to show you, before I go, the result of an analog poll. So those tapestries were responsive tapestries that responded to the public here. So this is what the tapestries looked like after interacting with people. So instead of maybe those 4 metrics that you saw today, maybe you just look at colors and you can see how you feel. Thank you.